welcome to Paint Night. Tonight we're going to be painting this watercolor sea turtle. If you registered, you should have everything that you need in your kit. You'll just want to grab a pencil to trace the line drawing and maybe some tape to run along the edges here, although that's totally optional. Let's get started. I'm going to go over everything that is in your kit. You should have 2 paint brushes. This is a round size 6, and then we've got this smaller detail brush. You should have a scrap of watercolor paper, and we're going to use that for testing your colors out. And you should have one of these cards with 5 different watercolors on it. These came from tubes of Van Gogh watercolor paints if you're looking to buy these shades for different projects. You should have a copy of the final painting and a copy of the reference photo. This is from Pixabay. You should have a line drawing, we're going to use that to trace, and a sheet of watercolor paper. It may also be handy to have some tape. You can use either painter's tape or washi tape to tape off the edges of the painting so that the watercolor doesn't extend past this area. So this is what I used. And then you'll also need a pencil for tracing the line drawing. So the first thing I'm going to do is make swatches of my colors. You have brand new watercolor brushes, so you're probably going to want to dip them in water and dry them off. They do come with some kind of material that keeps them pointed, but when you paint you don't want it on there. So we're going to try this Prussian blue out, and this is a really pretty color. And we also have this permanent yellow green. And we're going to be mixing these 2 shades for the water. And then these 3 brown shades are going to be the colors that make up the turtle. So we have raw sienna, burnt umber, and Van Dyke brown. So, like I said, we're going to be making the ocean using these 2 colors. So if you have a plate or a little palette like this, that'll make it a lot easier. And you want to make plenty of it because the blue is covering most of this paper. So I'm actually going to fill 2 of these wells with that shade. So I'm going to start with just some water. You don't have to do this beforehand, but if you're going to be using a lot of the same color and you're worried about it matching, it's a bit easier if you do it ahead of time than when you get stuck in the middle of the painting and you're out of paint, especially if the paint is wet. Then you end up with water lines and things that will make it look less smooth. Okay, so I'm going to start with my blue. And I do want these to look the same, so I'm going to try to put the same amount of paint in each one. And then our green. So this one looks more green. Okay, so those look roughly the same. So I'm going to add some water. And more paint. And because we're mixing the blue and the green, it doesn't matter if you get a little bit of blue paint on this dot here. So I'm going to see what that looks like. So I like that color, but it's a little bit light, which means I need more paint. More blue. A little bit more green. Of course, you may want your water more blue. So this really is going to be dependent on your preferences for the color. I like that, so now I just want to make sure that both of these look similar. This one's a little more blue, so I'm going to add some green. Okay, yep, those are pretty much a match. Okay, so that is our ocean color, and we're going to get ready for the first step of our painting. Before we work on the sea turtle, we're going to work on the background. So you'll notice that we've got 3 sections here. We've got a little corner here, this section, and the majority of it is over here. So I'm going to start with these smaller sections. And I'm just going to grab some paint, make sure my tape is stuck there, and fill this spot in. Now we want to have a little bit of variation in the color, so I rinsed my brush off and now I've just got water here so that this section is lighter. If you get some of the blue on the shell, it's not a big deal. We're going to color that in with some brown so you won't see the blue. So you can see it's darker up here and lighter here. So we want to do that for all of the water. So here, because this is a bigger spot, I'm going to use water first and then add the paint on. So when you start doing the larger sections, if you're working with your paint and then you're working on a section here and then it starts to dry along the edges, it's not going to look as smooth when you add more blue paint. So a way to get around that is to have some water down already, and this is not a lot of water, the paper is just damp. And then we can add our color in. And the good thing about having the water down is that you can drop the paint in just on different spots. And so you can have areas that are lighter and darker. And you can see the paint moving around on its own. And if you want, you can even add in some green, just straight from here. Just to add some different colors in there. Now I'm using the larger brush, but if you have trouble with this one, when it comes to working around this area here, You can use the smaller brush and add the paint in. So I'm going to add some more blue while it's wet. Now this larger area is going to be where we use the bulk of this paint. So with this area it's going to be a little bit more difficult to keep the paper wet. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did in this section. I'm not going to get this whole area wet because by the time I get up here this will already start drying. So I'm just going to start in the middle here with my water and work my way towards the turtle. And not all the way up to the edge because I'm going to be using paint around here. Okay, so now that this is wet, I'm going to work with my paint over here. Once I start to get closer to the edge where this water line is here, then I'll add more water in this section, and I'm just going to go section by section, adding a little bit of water at a time. So, oh, I got some blue on there. So starting on this side, you just want to be careful with, we're using a lot of paint and water with this, so you want to make sure that you're not dropping your paint. I dropped a little bit of blue here. That's not a big deal, it's going to get covered up, but if I had a huge drop, then I'd have to work on removing it. Okay, so I'm getting close to the edge here, so I'm going to rinse off my brush and add some water a little bit further out. Okay, so you can see the water, it's kind of shiny. So I'm to about here, so now I'm going to work on this section in here. And again, if you want to mix in some green, I'm just dropping it in. And then grabbing my blue paint and swirling it around so I don't have really obvious green spots. You do want to make sure you get your paint all the way to the edge where that tape is. Okay, so you can see I'm close to the edge, so I'm just going to add more water. Of course my water is getting cloudy now because of the paint that I've been rinsing in there, but since I'm only using this color mix, it's fine. So I'm going to wet the rest of this. So just working around the head, and again you can use the small brush. It's a little light down here, so I just want to make sure that I do this while the paper is still wet. Okay, so this last little section, I'm actually just going to use my paint to finish it off instead of getting it wet because this is such a small area. We had just enough paint. I'm going to grab my small brush and come in here. So this is the area where you see just a little bit of the other fin. a little bit more down here. Okay, so there's our water. We just want to make sure that we have the paint right up to the edge. Okay, so now you can either let this dry, air dry, or you can take a blow dryer to it to speed things up. So I'm going to go ahead and blow dry it, and then when I come back we're going to start working on the shell. So once our water has dried, the next thing we're going to start working on is the shell. If you look at the reference photo, you can see the turtle has a really pretty pattern on all of these scales. We're going to speed things up by just mixing different shades of brown for the shell. So I've drawn some, we're going to pretend these are scales here on the paper, so I'm just going to show you what we're going to do. We're going to be using a mix of raw sienna, burnt sienna, and Van Dyke brown. So I'm going to start by just adding some of this. And then grabbing some of the burnt umber. And then some of the Van Dyke brown. And this is a pretty dark brown, so you don't need too much of it. Okay. So once you've got all your colors, you can swish them around with your brush however you'd like, as long as you see different colors. You can also just mix two colors. For some of these darker scales, I just mixed the burnt umber and the Van Dyke brown. So this is the burnt umber, and there's the Van Dyke brown. If you decide later on that you want to put some raw sienna, you can drop it in there. So this is how we're going to work the scales on the shell. We'll also be doing that on the turtle's face later on. Alright, so the main thing with these is you want to make sure to leave a little bit of white space in between. Dropped water. Alright. Other than that, there's no specific way to do it, just drop the colors in however you see fit. So I'm going to start with these bigger ones. And this is just water. And I'm not using my palette like I did with the blue and green when we did the water earlier. I'm just grabbing it from here, but if you want to use a palette, you can. Since we're mixing all of these colors, it doesn't matter too much if we get the colors mixed up. So there is some raw sienna. Get some more water. Some more burnt umber. Grab some of the Van Dyke brown, drop it in. So since this is such a dark shade, I am going to fill this in with water, because if we're doing the straight brown paint on the paper, it's going to be too dark and it's not going to look blended. Okay, so this is kind of light, so I'm going to come in with some more of the burnt umber, but this time I've removed most of the water from my brush, so the color's a bit deeper. And there's some raw sienna. add some Van Dyke Brown down here. This is looking more the way that I want it to. And if you end up putting too much paint down, you can always just rinse your brush off and use water to move everything around. So I like how that looks, so I'm going to continue to do that throughout the rest of the shell. And then we'll start to work on the head a little bit. So if you're having trouble, if your lines don't look straight, you can come in with this smaller brush and some paint and clean up the lines. So you can just smooth things out with this smaller brush. Okay, and make sure to watch out for stuff like this. I do this all the time. If you get paint on your hand, make sure to wipe that off, because the next thing you know, you'll put your hand down and then you'll have a spot of paint on your paper. And if it's a dark color, you may not be able to get it off easily. So I got a little bit too much paint there, so I'm just cleaning some of that up. So that you can still see the white space in between there. So for this one, I'm switching over to my smaller brush just because it's such a thin area. And I'm actually going to use a smaller brush up here too. And I'm going to use it here. And here as well. So now that we have our shell done, we're going to start working on the head. So it's going to be more of the same, except we're just going to be using our smaller brush. But just filling in these spots using in the different shades of brown. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is work on this little section here that I forgot about. So I'm just adding some dark spots over here. There's a little light spot. And then some dark brown here for the nostrils. Now we're going to be working on the eye, so we're going to use Van Dyke Brown for that. I'm going to start by just outlining it with a small brush here. I'm going to rinse my brush off. And just use water to fill this in. So that keeps it from looking too dark, so there's a little bit of a light spot there in the middle. Now for this area, we're going to use watered down burnt sienna. So I'm going to wet this whole area. And then fill it in. So you don't want it too dark. Once we get it around the front, I'm going to use my smaller brush. So while waiting on this to dry, I'm going to work on this area here. So on the painting, it's this light color. So we're going to be doing that, and then we'll come back and add these darker spots on top later on. So I'm going to use a little bit of raw sienna and a little bit of burnt umber. And some water. And I'm going to be filling this space in here. So this is still wet, so I want to make sure not to touch it with this paint. And I'm going to grab some of this and just come around in these little spaces here. Make sure you don't touch these spots or the eye. So we just don't want to see as much of the white paper. And I'm going to fill this spot in too and come back later on and work on it. So I'm going to do the same thing in this section. Just watered down raw sienna and burnt sienna. And this is going to come, there's a line here. So there's a little bit of space in between the shell and these dots here. I'm going to come around and I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber in this corner here. So where these folds are, you want it to be a little bit darker. And I'm going to do the same thing here. This paint should still be wet. Add a little bit of the darker paint here too. So just where there are creases, you want it to be a little bit of a darker color. Then we'll come back later on, once we're done with this arm here, and do this spot. So, as you can guess, this is more of the same, what we did up here. But looking at the reference photo, these scales here are darker, so I'm going to try to keep this side darker and this side lighter. So, same thing, just using all these colors, filling in all these spots. so now that we've got most of the spots done, we can concentrate on just filling in some of the blank spaces and adding details. So I'm going to mix raw sienna and burnt sienna again just to get a light brown, and that is going to go here. So I'm just filling in this space. We're going right up to these spots. And I'm going to grab some burnt sienna and add it up at the top. And some Van Dyke Brown. Just add it in this corner here. You can also use your small brush to do that part. So now I'm just taking my dry brush and running it along here. I've got a little bit too much water. Okay, now I'm going to take my small brush and I'm going to add little spots on the head. And I did include these in the tracing, but they don't need to be exact, so if you didn't trace all of those, it's fine. And we're going to make some scales over here with raw sienna. Look on the reference photo, we've got a little arm over here, a flipper. So just make sure you have a little bit of space in between each one. Okay, now I'm going to add some lines in here with raw sienna. So on the tracing, there's some curved lines, so that's what this is. Or sorry, this is the burnt umber. I'm going to take some of the Van Dyke Brown and do the same thing. I'm also going to take some of the Van Dyke Brown and come here. So this line is Van Dyke Brown. So I'm going to use my small brush and just draw a line. And I've rinsed my brush off. I've got some of the burnt sienna here. So now this is water and I'm just bringing it up to the edge here, just to soften the line. And this is some burnt sienna. And this is just water. So you don't have to do all of this, you can just do the line. I just wanted it to look a little bit softer. So now I'm gonna come put some details over here. So same thing, just adding these little wrinkles. Let's see, some over here. And then the Van Dyke Brown. And over here, we've got some little spots. And we've got Van Dyke Brown, and I'm going to make some spots here. And now I'm going to take some of the burnt umber, just make a line along there and along the bottom. Water, and I'm just filling in the space there. Of course, if you end up touching the spots, it bleeds, but I'm not too worried about it. Okay, so that space is filled in. I think we need to add some detail around the eye. So I'm going to grab some of this Van Dyke Brown, and we're just going to add some lines. Around here and on the other side. A couple more spots. I'm going to make this a little bit darker. I've got some of the Van Dyke Brown. Now I'm going to take the larger brush with just some water on it and get this wet, and then drag the water up here. This is just some raw sienna. I'm just looking around to see now if there are spaces that need to be filled in. And I think we've pretty much got everything. So the last thing we're going to do is remove our tape. And I'm hoping that I didn't get any paint underneath the tape. So I've got a little bit of paint here. I can just cover that up with a white marker. You can also grab some clean water and scrub that off if it happens. So I'm going to get some water, clean water, on my brush and see if I can pick that up. So I've got water on my brush and I'm just rubbing back and forth with this to see if I can lift some of it. And if not, I will just use a white pen or paint marker. Yep. Okay. I'll just go that route. If you get this too wet, you might disturb the paint. So I hope you enjoyed painting your turtle. If you have any questions, please let me know. And next month we'll be working on an acrylic painting project. So stay tuned for details on that, as well as information on how to register. I'll see you next time.